In the past week, two brand new coffee grinders have been released, the fellow Opus and the Baratza Encore ESP. Now on paper, these grinders are essentially the exact same thing, being 40mm conical burr grinders that can do everything from espresso to cold brew, but in reality, they actually perform very differently. So let's talk about what those differences are and which one is best for you. Hello, my name is Stephen Holm and I'm with HomeGrounds, a place for you to go to learn more about brewing and enjoying better quality coffee right at home. Now I want to start this video by just pointing out, for transparency's sake, that both the Baratza Encore ESP and the fellow Opus were sent to me from the manufacturers. They asked for me to try them out, and if I liked them enough, I was welcome to make a review of each, and I have done that. I have separate reviews of each grinder, so if you want to check those out, feel free. But today we are comparing them between one another, because like I mentioned in the introduction, these grinders are essentially the same thing. They are 40mm conical burr, all-purpose grinders that can do everything from espresso to cold brew. So I'm not going to be going over all of the features of each of these grinders in this video. If you want to know more about those, like I mentioned, I have whole separate reviews on each of them. So today we're just going to be comparing them directly, and to start, let's talk about the grind's quality that we're getting out of these grinders. Now this section is going to get a little bit nerdy, so feel free to skip it if you're not interested, but this is going to be pretty much the biggest difference between these grinders. So to start, let's look at the fellow Opus. This grinder has 41 grind settings that you are able to adjust internally to get more or less out of those 41, but on the outside we have 41 grind settings, and it progresses at a linear rate. So I'll throw up a graph on the screen, and what this is looking at is the average micron size of those coffee grounds at each setting along the grinder. So you can see that it increases at a standard rate. Nothing super special is going on in there. Now if we go and look at the Baratza Encore ESP, this grinder performs a little bit differently, because Baratza already has their original Encore, which isn't designed for espresso, but technically the finest setting can grind for espresso. And what they did with the ESP is they took the first half of the grind settings, or the finer half, and they made that section span a shorter distance and grind sizes. So those entire 20 settings are able to be used for espresso, so you have more adjustability in the espresso range, but then once you get past there, those grind steps are going to give you less and less adjustability in the drip range. So I'll throw up the same graph that we saw earlier, but for the Encore ESP. And you can see that on the first half of that graph, the grind setting doesn't go up that much, and that's that espresso range. So you're better able to dial in an espresso in that range because we have so many steps. But then after that, the second half of the graph, it really jumps up, and so we have less settings in that drip range that can work based on what brewer you are using. And now before I move on to talk about what that means for our coffee brewing, I'm going to throw up one more graph, and this is going to be showing the uniformity of each grinder. So what we're actually seeing on the graph is, at each grind setting, what is the standard deviation of the coffee grounds that you are getting. So a higher number of standard deviation means that there is more of a range of grind sizes, and so it's less uniform, versus a smaller number means you are getting a more uniform grind size, which we'll just say for the sake of this video that a more uniform grind size is usually a better thing. You can see that in the espresso range, the Encore ESP has a better uniformity, whereas when we get past there, the Opus is a little bit better. I'm not going to talk much more about that, but I just wanted to throw that out there in case you are interested. So now if we go back to what we were talking about earlier with the different grind sizes and how the ESP has a lot more of a range for espresso, what does that mean for your brewing? And so if you're someone who makes a lot of espresso at home, you know that you want a lot of adjustability in the espresso range, because espresso is a very finicky beverage, and a little bit of change can make a huge difference in the taste of your cup. And so with the ESP, you have a lot more adjustability with your espresso. You have 20 settings on here that can all be used for espresso. And so I had no issues whatsoever dialing in a coffee as espresso with this grinder. Whereas if we look at the Opus, in my review of that grinder, I talked about how each click was adjusting the shot time by almost 20 to 30 seconds. So we don't have as much adjustability if we're someone that really wants to dive in and dial in our espresso. Now, if you are someone who mainly does drip brewing and you want the occasional espresso out of these grinders, they're both going to do a fairly good job. However, the Opus does a little bit better with that because we have more adjustability within the brew range, whereas, like I mentioned earlier, the Encore ESP just kind of jumps up once you get past the espresso range, and so it's not as dial-in-able as the fellow Opus would be. So now let's compare the workflow and the usability of these two grinders. With the fellow Opus, we have a hopper, and on this lid, there are different volumetric dosings, so you can say, put in 20 grams of coffee in here and you don't necessarily have to weigh it, although that isn't going to be perfect. But at least if you're not someone who likes to weigh out your coffee every time you brew, you at least have these as a guideline. And then also on the inside of this lid, they provide you with good guesses as to what grind setting you want to use based on what brewer you are using. And so I can look inside this lid and say I'm making a French press, I know that I want to grind between settings 8 and 10. So that's a nice little feature if you're not sure even where to start with a new brew method. Down here with the Opus, we have the catch cup that has the dosing cup as an accessory that can fit right onto your portafilter. The Opus also has automated timers, so you can press the button once and it'll automatically grind for 30 seconds and stop, twice for a minute. And then the Opus also has anti-static technology, so we aren't getting a lot of static and coffee grounds built up down here, so we have virtually no mess when coffee grinding. So all of that together, looking at the Opus, it definitely has a lot of functions and features and little aids to help you brew better coffee, which is nice for someone either just starting out or someone who doesn't even know where to begin with this grinder. Now if we move on and look at the Encore ESP, it's a lot more simple. So we just have a hopper up here that I like to weigh out my coffee in the lid and just dump it in. As far as turning the grinder on and off, we either have a front button that is just press and hold, and when you release, it'll stop. Or we have a switch on the side that once you switch it on, it'll keep running until you switch it off. Now under here, you can either grind into the traditional catch cup, which is good for any sort of filter grinding, or we also have a dosing cup accessory, which you can just place in here and then grind directly into this dosing cup, which fits into your espresso basket. Now, as for the build quality on the two grinders, they're pretty much the same. They're all plastic, they have stainless steel burrs in them, and they're about the same weight. Baratza as a brand is known for having great customer service and being able to build replacement parts for pretty much everything in here. So you know that if anything breaks in this grinder, you're going to be able to fix that, and they have great customer service to back it up. Fellow hasn't been making grinders for as long, so I can't speak as much to being able to replace certain parts in there, but they have great customer service, so I'm sure if anything comes up that they can definitely help you out. So looking at all of this, can we answer which one is best? And it really comes down to how you want to be using these for espresso and drip. If you are someone who wants an espresso focused grinder that you can occasionally make drip coffee with, the Encore ESP is definitely the way to go. Those extra settings for espresso really make a big difference if you are someone that makes a lot of espresso. Whereas if you are someone who brews a lot of different types of drip coffee, you do different types of pour overs and everything, and you just want a grinder that can do those pretty well, but also has the ability to make the occasional espresso, the Opus is going to be great for you. It has a lot of adjustability in the brew setting range, so whatever brew method you are using, you can be sure that you will be able to get a good cup of coffee out of there. So those are all the big differences between these two grinders that just came out. If you have any additional questions, please let me know in the comments down below, or if there's anything I missed or things that you want to get clarification on. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, happy brewing.